Mr. in Cuba. In this connection, I want to say at the outset that the course adopted by the Soviet Union yesterday to avoid direct confrontations in the zone of quarantine are welcome to my government. Quarantine are welcome to my government. We also welcome the assurance by Chairman Khrushchev in his letter to Earl Russell that the Soviet Union will take no reckless decisions with regard take no reckless decisions with regard to this crisis. And we welcome most of all the report that Mr. Khrushchev has agreed to the proposals Secretary General. Perhaps that report will be confirmed here today. My government is most anxious to effect a peaceful resolution of this affair. We continue to hope that the Soviet Union continue to hope that the Soviet Union will work with us to diminish not only the new danger which has suddenly shadowed the peace, but all of the conflicts that divide. all of the conflicts that divide the world. I shall not detain you with any detailed discussion of the Soviet and the Cuban responses to our complaint. The speeches to our complaint. The speeches of the communist delegates were entirely predictable. I shall make brief comment on some points suggested by these speeches and some other points which may have arisen in the minds of members of the United Nations. Both Chairman Khrushchev, in his letter to Earl Russell, and Ambassador Zorin, in his remarks to this council, argued that this threat to the peace had been caused not by the peace had been caused not by the Soviet Union and Cuba, but by the United States. We are here today and have been this week for one single reason: because the Soviet Union secretly introduced this menacing offensive military buildup into the island of Cuba, while assuring the world that nothing was further from their thoughts. The argument in its from their thoughts. The argument in its essence of the Soviet Union is that it was not the Soviet Union which created this threat to peace by secretly installing these weapons in Cuba, but installing these weapons in Cuba, but that it was the United States which created this crisis by discovering and reporting these installations. This is the first time, I confess, that I've ever ever heard it said that the crime is not the burglar, but the discovery of the burglar, and that the threat is not the clandestine missiles in Cuba, but their discovery and the limited measures taken to quarantine further infection. The peril arises not because the nations of the Western Hemisphere have joined together to take necessary action in their self-defense, but because the Soviet Union has extended its nuclear The Soviet Union has extended its nuclear threat into the Western Hemisphere. I noted that there is still at least some delegates in the Council, possibly, I suspect very few, who say that they don't I suspect very few who say that they don't know whether the Soviet Union has in fact built in Cuba installations capable of firing nuclear missiles over ranges from 1,000 to 2,000 miles. As I say, from 1,000 to 2,000 miles. As I say, Chairman Khrushchev did not deny these facts in his letter to Earl Russell, nor did Ambassador Zorin on Tuesday evening. And if further doubt remains on this, score, we shall gladly exhibit photographic evidence to the doubtful. One other point I'd like to make, Mr. President and gentlemen, is invite President and gentlemen, is invite attention to the casual remark of the Soviet representative claiming that we have 35 bases in foreign countries. The facts are that there are missiles comparable to these being placed in Cuba with the forces of only 3 of our allies. They were only established there by a decision of the heads of government meeting in December 1957, which was compelled to authorize such arrangements by virtue of a prior Soviet decision to introduce its own missiles. Decision to introduce its own missiles capable of destroying the countries of Western Europe. In the next place, there are some troublesome questions in the minds of members that are entitled to minds of members that are entitled to serious answers.